Hi everybody, this is Earth Skills with Jeff Gottlieb, and the last couple of shows I've been highlighting some ancient primitive skills, and I thought we might tackle something that feels a lot more modern, and that is stuff that you might like to plant in your garden or on your homestead. So first, a lot of people are using the word homestead to describe how they're living and where they're living, but what do I mean by that? You could have a house on a piece of property that's not a homestead. What's a homestead? A homestead is that your house and your piece of property actually return value to you. Like if your property just costs you money to live there, then it's not a homestead. But if your homestead is producing lumber, or you're raising rabbits on it, or you're growing vegetables, or you have a little nursery and you sell plants, whatever it is where it's returning value to your life, does it help you in some way? Does it return something to you? So my homestead, a lot of how it helps me is by the plants that I have growing on it. So these are some examples. I brought 6 plants that I think would be very valuable on most people's homestead. And I brought examples of plants that will grow on a great area of the United States. So they're not regionally specific. Well, you can only grow it on the south slope of this mountain in this part of this state. No, these are plants that may not have a wide range, but they will grow if you put them there. And they're plants with many really valuable uses. So what are some uses plants can have? How can they give back value to you? Well, some plants, you can eat them. They might produce green vegetables. You might be able to make tea with them. They might make nuts or fruit or any number of different foods. So there's a lot of food here on this table. Other things plants can do, they can be medicinal. You can use them for everything from relieving a bug bite to supporting your immune system or treating the common cold or anything like that. And sometimes the value that plants have, they're not directly for you, they're to help this ecosystem of your homestead. So some plants are very attractive to pollinators. So if you've got plants where all the bees and butterflies and moths in your neighborhood want to come and pollinate those plants, then you will have more pollinators in general visiting your spot. So that will mean that your fruit set is better and you'll get more yield and you'll get more reproduction from your plants. Other things plants can do, well, let's start with one. This is comfrey. And comfrey is not edible to you. I feed it to my rabbits all the time. They love it. It's very nutritious. But the big value of comfrey is its medicinal qualities. I broke my knee 5 years ago. I smashed it really good. I broke 2 bones and tore 2 ligaments, and I was out of commission for months. And the first thing that my herbalist friends and my people in medical fields told me was, drink comfrey tea. So they got me some dried comfrey leaf, and I would put a tablespoon-sized scoop in a cup of boiling water and drink it 5 times a day. And it doesn't make much of an experiment because I don't have a control group. I don't have a me that didn't drink the comfrey. So I only know that my knee healed up really well. How much of it was the comfrey? I don't know. But it's very, very widely discussed that comfrey is really good for healing deep tissue injuries and things like that. Bone bruises, muscle aches, things like that. Another thing people use comfrey for is to take a piece of the root and chop it up, grind it, and then put it on externally. And it is very, very good at getting cells to replicate themselves. So the one caution people have about using comfrey is, first of all, the root is not to be taken internally, just the leaves. But the root and the leaf, they have that action of making cells grow back really fast. So if you have an open wound that could be infected, you don't want to close that. Because if it closes the top of the wound before the bottom is healed, then you're trapping things inside the wound and you could make an infection worse. However, this is just something that theoretically people caution you about. I might still use it. But I might realize that, I have to make sure that this wound is really healthy and it's really clean, it's really healing, and then the Comfrey will help it grow back. But especially for areas where the skin's not broken. So Comfrey's great. What it'll help you with that's not in your body, it does a couple of things very, very powerful. It has thick, fleshy, deep roots that go way down deep. And what they do is they collect minerals from the soil down deep. A lot of the minerals that we think, oh yeah, we need plants need minerals, so we put them on the soil. Those aren't in a useful form. The best thing you can do is have a plant that harvests those minerals out of the soil and incorporates them in its own tissues, and then it's in living material, and then it's composted. And then those minerals are in the soil in a usable form at the surface. So Comfrey is what's called a dynamic accumulator. So powerful, really, really helpful for your garden, for your plantings. So a lot of people plant it near their fruit trees and bushes. And it seems to be a really good companion plant to those things. A lot of research and a lot of writing has been done on plants that like to live near other plants and what benefit they give each other. There's a really famous book called Carrots Love Tomatoes, talking about how if you plant this vegetable next to that vegetable, they both help each other out. Maybe one of them chases away insect pests, maybe one of them fixes nitrogen. There are all kinds of things plants can do for each other. So the Comfrey, if you plant it near your fruit trees and near your berry bushes, it will pull up those minerals and make them available. It will also spread. Comfrey is great at taking up elbow room, getting really big. And if it does, then it's going to be a useful plant that crowds out all the other weeds. And it also shades that area, keeps it moist and cool. So the fruit trees and bushes seem to do better when they've got Comfrey growing near them. So medicine for you in several different ways, food for your livestock, dynamic accumulator that pulls up minerals, and a companion plant for your fruit trees. The last thing is, because it's pulling up all those minerals and it's very high in protein as well, you can just chop it. Those roots are enormous and they have the ability to regrow new leaves really easily. So you can, in the growing season, you can chop it down to the ground 3 times, take everything you chop down to the ground and mix that in your compost that you're making, and it will really jumpstart the quality of your compost. So Comfrey is a great plant. Not only that, it's got really beautiful flowers. The kind of pinkish purple bell-shaped flowers. Beautiful. Okay, so Comfrey. So I don't know if you can see this really well. This is a rosebush. It's a rugosa rose. Rugosa means wrinkled, and the leaves are crinkly. It grows large, simple pink flowers, which are aromatic. They are fragrant and they're beautiful. And this is one spiny-looking plant. So I would consider planting it heavily as a hedge, and trespassers will be a little deterred from poking through the hedges to get through the other side. This gets to be a big bush. Mine are 5 feet tall and 5 feet wide, and really dense. They're not spindly. This is just one sprout that I cut. The bushes, if the branches sag out onto the ground, they take root. So the next year you can just cut them off right there, and you got a new plant. So they're easy to propagate. So the flowers are perfectly usable rose petals. So rose petals in tea, rose petals in other kinds of recipes, and rose petals as medicine. They're They use rose petals in some skin preparations and things like that. Not to mention they're just beautiful roses. On top of that, once the rose is finished, it forms a fruit called a rose hip. And rugosa roses make really big, really flavorful rose hips. And why would you want rose hip fruits? They're extremely high in vitamin C. They have 10 times the vitamin C of oranges. And they're easy to harvest, dry, and then use dry for tea. And I like to just plain old eat them. Just pick them. Apples are in the rose family. So if you can imagine the kind of the architecture of an apple where it's got a seed box that you don't eat, and then around it has the flesh. Same thing with the rose hips. It's just thinner flesh, but it's really delicious. And I have a friend that really likes the rose hips for making jam. So it's a great plant. Rugosa roses will grow in sand dunes next to the beach. So they're really not fussy about the soil they like to be in. So that means that they will make themselves at home, and they will make compost and improve the soil, because they'll be dropping leaves like any deciduous shrub. They'll be dropping leaves. They'll be increasing the soil life around them. More earthworms will live there, and that kind of thing. So you've got a stable bush that it doesn't spread widely. It doesn't throw seeds all over the place. You can manage it easily enough, and it will grow in terrible soil and improved conditions. So it's great. And I've seen it growing as far north as New England. And here we are in the Carolinas, and it grows just fine. It's big range where it will grow. It's a great plant. Rugosa rose. So, some medicinal qualities. Beautiful. Landscaping kind of hedges. And food. So, rugosa rose. Oh, so if it's growing in sand, it is stabilizing the sand, so it's controlling erosion. Which is why they plant it in a lot of seaside locations, is to keep the wind and water from blowing away the sand. Oh, it's also salt tolerant. So, living right next to the ocean, you're going to get salt spray, and that will kill a lot of plants. It doesn't bother rugosa rose. They love it. So, okay, cool. So if you're learning about plants, one of the most valuable courses of study for you is to learn about plant families. And if you understand, this family of plants has this set of characteristics, that will help you to maybe decide what you want to grow, decide what you want to use it for, and even to find useful plants in the wild. So the rose family contains a whole lot of the fruit we eat. Apples, pears, peaches, plums, cherries. Big family. And strawberries are all in the rose family. And that just goes to show you, just because they're in the family doesn't mean they act like the type descriptor. Like we think rose family must be like a rose. Must be a bush that grows flowers that is thorny. Well, then you got strawberries. It just means they have a 5-part flower. They're related. The seeds are similar. Yeah. Okay. So here's another big family that's found all over the world. This is the mint family. This is catnip. How do I know it's mint family? It's got a stem that's square in cross section. The leaves come off the stem opposite from each other. They are toothy at the edges, and if you were to rub them and smell them, they have a strong aroma. I mean, we're all familiar with the fragrance of mint. Almost all the other members of the mint family have some sort of aromatic quality like that. And many, many, many of them are really pleasant, and you'd love to have a cup of tea made with that stuff. So catnip. Now, we know catnip because if you have a cat and you give some catnip to your cat, they enjoy it, they play, they, whatever. It doesn't do the same thing to people at all. As a matter of fact, it does exactly the opposite. Catnip will make cats really frisky and run around and play. If you give catnip tea to small children that are really wound up and it's time for bed and you want them to calm down, give them a cup of catnip tea and they will. It's a mild sedative in all the right ways. So it makes cats crazy and children calm, and it's really nutritious and it's delicious for people, and it's also a lot of the plants in the mint family are tremendous attractors of pollinators. So every bee in the neighborhood wants to come over when the catnip's flowering and all that stuff. So catnip's great. It's wonderful not only as a tea all by itself. Just pick a bunch of leaves, chop them up, put them in a cup, pour boiling water on them, and you have tea in 3 minutes. But they're also fantastic in mixtures, like you might like the catnip plus spearmint plus something else to make a tea. So it's great. You can pick the leaves and dry them and use them dried. They're also very, very hardy. They'll grow in terrible infertile soil and throw seeds and reproduce just fine. Okay, something else about plants. Some plants, like the rose bushes, are perennial. In other words, the same plant is alive and it will be there throughout the winter. It may not have live leaves on it, but there it is. Okay? The comfrey is perennial. The leaves and stems will die back to the ground, but the roots are quite alive and it will just pop new leaves and stems out in the next year. So those are perennial. You can also have plants that are what we call semi-hardy. So if nothing seriously, nothing happens to them, then they might live throughout the winter and be there the next year. Rosemary in our climate would be one of those things. Last winter killed my rosemary bush because our month of January was brutal. Killed all my fig trees down to the ground too. Don't worry, they're starting to sprout leaves. They'll be back. So the catnip is hardy into pretty cold weather, and it's not perennial, and it's not going to last through the winter no matter what. What's going to happen is it's going to make 1 million seeds. So it's an annual, but a lot of people get fooled because they think, well, it's here in this area every single year, but it's just because it reseeded and seed sprouted. So yeah, a lot of the mints are not hardy throughout the winter. They just make a lot of seeds. Some of the mints are hardy, like my peppermint. I don't see any peppermint leaves in the winter, but in the spring, it'll just pop right back up. So, catnip, I love it. It's a really nice aroma and a really nice flavor. That's pretty. A lot of the mint family plants have gorgeous flowers. Here's one of my favorite ones. This is bee balm, and I wish I could show you one with flowers on them. It'll have a big head of flowers, and a lot of flowers are single. Like a rose is one flower, and it's going to make one fruit. But the mint family makes this head of tiny little flowers, so you would think the whole thing was a flower, but it's made of many little flowers. Okay, so bee balm makes a big head of brilliantly red flowers, and it's the hummingbird favorite. Hummingbirds love red flowers. So your bee balm is going to attract hummingbirds, not to mention hummingbird moths and other kinds of pollinators and stuff. So it grows, perennial root. It grows new stalks every year, and they're tall. They could be 4 feet tall or 5 feet tall. And also delicious tea. Nice leaf, tender. Delicious. Now, the oil that makes the fragrance in bee balm and also all the bergamots, this is the genus Monarda. All the Monardas, the active principle is bergamot. And if you look at a pack of Earl Grey tea and note the flavor that's in it besides the tea, it's oil of bergamot. But they're not getting that oil of bergamot from Monardas. They're getting it from a citrus that grows in Asia. So, anyway. But that flavor is in these Monardas, and it makes delicious tea. So, a lot of these mints, they aren't going to be really delicious if you just picked them and ate them. Some mints are good, like as garnishes or in things, minced in things, but they have a little bitterness. So it's all in the fragrance as far as the food value. So this is fantastic in different tea blends. Really delicious. So attracts pollinators, you make tea out of it. You could also flavor recipes with the... Now, I'm not sure where to go with that. Another thing is you can eat the flowers. There are a lot of edible flowers. We don't even think about the long list of, like we have certain plants we know, okay, they make food, or, oh, these are beautiful, or, oh, but the flowers are not only non-toxic, they're delicious and they're nutritious and they're good for you. So, the bee balm being so brilliantly colorful, imagine garnishing a salad with beautiful little scarlet flowers. This is a cultivated one, so the flowers aren't scarlet, they got a little purple in with the scarlet. So it's a tame variety of a native wild plant. All right. So here is a locally widespread plant in the mountains here. But it will grow in standard garden soil anywhere. It can withstand freezing winters. It's a wild plant here in the mountains, and it grows up to really high elevation. I've been seeing it at 6,000 feet up on the Parkway. So it doesn't mind. This is a close relative of black-eyed Susan. And this family is the composite family, which includes daisies and dandelions and sunflowers and things like that, where they have petals in radial rays like that, and a head with little, what'd you call them? Just separate divisions in that head. And if you imagine a whole head, a sunflower head, remember that when they make seeds, each one of those things grows a seed. Well, each one of those little divided spots in the center is actually a whole flower. That's why it's a composite. So they're composite flowers. They're made up of, that flower is made up of flowers. So anyway, this one is related to black-eyed Susan. It's a Rudbeckia is the genus, and it is called green coneflower or cutleaf coneflower, and the Cherokees call it sochan. And sochan is a really important plant to people who are living close to the land because it's one of the first edible, nutritious plants to pop up in the springtime. So, by the time February rolls around, you've eaten up all your stored food, you are just plain old running out of food, and you haven't seen a fresh vegetable in months. So, homesteaders 150 years ago really were happy to see this plant in the spring. It's one of the first things up. The sochan and the ramps. So in early April, you start seeing these. And if you've got a fairly warm winter, the sochan will leave little tiny, leave a cluster of tiny leaves throughout the winter that the winter weather doesn't kill. And then as soon as spring comes, they sprout and get bigger. But you could go and harvest little leaves if you wanted to. They're perfectly fine to eat raw, especially when they're young and tender. When they get taller and a little tougher, you want to cook them. I think sochan tastes like spiced celery. It's really, really nice cooked vegetable. And it's also a composite with a beautiful flower. It's called green coneflower because the center dot of the flower is green, but the petals are yellow. Really pretty. It's the size of a bush, but it's going to die back to the ground for the winter. So most people just cut off all the dead stalks and just watch it come back up again. So it's great. You'll usually see it where there's lots of water. It'll grow next to streams. It'll grow in low spots that collect water. It likes lots of sun and lots of water. But if you put it in your garden and just water normally, great. It'll grow really well. It's not that fussy as to soil, but it does well, and I love it. I love it because there's something green most of the year. The flowers are beautiful. Pollinators like it, and it's delicious. So, good plant to have. It also ends up being a good companion plant. Growing it next to your other larger things. I have it growing next to my hazel bushes, my hazelnuts. So. And the last one, you may not recognize it as a little sprout in a pot, but it's a mulberry tree. And this is white mulberry, and white mulberry is what we would call an escaped plant. In other words, people brought it, people planted it, people wanted it, but then it started making seeds itself and it got away, and it's growing all over the place now. I wouldn't call it invasive because it doesn't really reproduce itself that fast. It's just successful. And it was brought here to try to establish a silkworm trade. If you've ever heard anything about silkworms, they eat mulberry leaves. So they brought this mulberry tree, this is a white mulberry, so they could feed silkworms. So I don't have any silkworms, but why would I want this? Fruit. Fruit is really, really good. Mulberry fruits are just downright delicious. There are lots of varieties. The white is only one of them. There's lots of cultivated ones and hybrid ones that you can get that might have much bigger fruit or really great flavor, or they don't get to be tree size, they stay small. But this is great. It grows to be a small tree. And something I just found out, and I'm exploring more, is that the leaves are edible. And they're not only edible for people, they're edible for livestock in huge quantities. And they're very bushy and very leafy, and if you prune them to be bushier, they will be absolutely covered in leaves. And what people do is they'll prune them and they'll just hand the branches to their goats, sheep, cows. They love them. They're really, really nutritious. Mulberry leaves, I understand, are very high in protein, like much more protein than other normal tree leaves. So they're extremely nourishing to feed to livestock. I haven't started feeding them to my rabbits, but I know they really like twigs and bark and leaves and parts of trees. So once they've all leafed out, and mulberries are unusual. They don't even pop out their leaves until pretty late in the spring. This is normal. These have been outside, and they didn't make any leaves. Through February, when some things are budding, through March, when many things are leafing out, through April. I mean, barely by the end of April did I see any leaves at all on mulberries, and now they're kind of popping out and growing nicely. So I'll do that. Why else mulberries?
Mulberries.
Well, yeah, we talked about the fruit. They're delicious. Let's say that again. The fruit's wonderful. Mulberries are delicious. They can stain, even though this is called white mulberry. It's not because the fruit's white. The fruit is, there are varieties where the fruit is white, but the fruits are dark purple or black or kind of black and purple. And you definitely don't want to plant this over your deck or park your car underneath it, because at the time of year when the fruit's there, all the birds in the neighborhood will come and eat the fruit, and then they will poop all over your car or your deck or your house or whatever. So make sure you choose the location carefully. Another thing mulberry will do is it will grow really strong, fine textured fibers. So if you're growing it, you can get, if you prune a tree and it makes a shoot that's long and straight, and you let that mature, then that will be a trunk that is long and straight. So if you were to cut that trunk and peel the bark, you would get long, neat strips of bark, strong enough that you can then process that bark fiber, clean it out. And native people in the Gulf region used to weave fabric out of it. It's really, really nice textured fiber. So mulberries are a great plant to have. So there are so many more. I just picked 6, and I sure don't limit my own homestead to 6 plants. I use many of the weeds that are growing. What's a weed? A weed is a plant that's growing where somebody decided they don't want it. Grass can be a weed if it's growing in your flower bed. If you say, I don't want that there, and you pull it out, you call it a weed, somebody else could call it an asset, a treasure, a plant they want. So I don't have any weeds at my place. I just have plants. Right? So yeah. So just some thoughts about plants for your homestead. In permaculture, we say that we want to stack functions. What do we mean by that? That if you do a thing, if you put your energy into a project, see if you can do a project and do it in such a way that it does more than one thing. So choosing these plants, I think I came up with at least 3 or 4 things that each plant was good for, and some of them have a lot more than that. So I just like to judge plants that way. And every now and then there's a plant that just has one use, but I really want it to do that use. So I'm happy to have it. So plants on your homestead. Find out more. Find out more about plants. Look up plants. Read about them. Talk to people who garden. Talk to people who homestead about what plants they have and why they have them. Not all plants will grow in all places, even if they theoretically can grow in that growth zone. So you might have to make a special spot with special soil for that plant, and it's usually not worth the trouble because there's so many kinds of plants. Pick ones that will grow. So that's it. I could have gone on for hours more. I could have brought another 10 plants and worked with those and showed you those, but it's just a little intro to whet your appetite. So this has been Earth Skills with Jeff Gottlieb, and these are 6 plants I like on my homestead, and you might like them too.